I never thought helping with napkins would turn me into the help at my own daughter's wedding. I stood by the buffet table, just like she'd asked, making sure the napkins were folded just right. I wore a blue lace dress I'd bought months ago, the one I imagined I'd wear proudly in the wedding photos, standing beside my daughter as the mother of the bride. Instead, she picked up the mic, smiled, and introduced me to the room as someone who's always helping us with the little things. Not Mom, not even Loretta, just the staff. There was a pause, a confused silence, before her new-in-laws chuckled politely. One of them glanced at my shoes and whispered, "She must be from the catering team." I heard them. Oh, I heard every word. But I didn't flinch. I stood there with a gentle smile frozen on my face, like I hadn't just been erased from my own daughter's life. Melissa always had a gift for performance. She knew how to shape her story. And in this one, I was a background prop, the quiet woman who kept the wheels turning, invisible and unimportant. But let me tell you something, I've survived worse. I've raised a child alone. I've faced down life with nothing but grit and a prayer. And I didn't come this far to be humiliated like a hired hand in front of people who wouldn't know sacrifice if it hit them in the face. As the toasts began and guests gushed about the couple's perfect match, I stood in the back of the room, watching my daughter laugh like nothing had happened. She looked radiant, she looked free, and I realized that freedom had come at a cost. Me. I don't know what hurt more, being ignored, or realizing how easy it was for her to forget who held her when she was sick, who sold her own wedding ring to pay for college deposits, who worked overtime so she could have ballet shoes instead of bare feet. So, I did the unthinkable. I walked up to the microphone. Slow, calm, no theatrics. Just me, Loretta, 68, retired schoolteacher. The woman who gave Melissa everything she has. The room went quiet. I wasn't invited here as Melissa's mother, I began. She told you I'm just someone who helps out. And I suppose I am. I helped pay for her tuition, her first car, the apartment she shares with Brandon. I helped raise her into the woman she is today. But what I won't do is be silent while I'm erased. Melissa's smile disappeared. Brandon's father set down his wine glass. A few guests stared at their plates. And since I'm just the help, let me help clear something up. That beautiful house they brag about? Still in my name. I pay the taxes. I paid the down payment. And tonight, I make my final contribution. I'm done. I left the mic on the table. No screaming, no tears, just truth, served cold, after years of being fed scraps. I walked out of that ballroom with my back straight and my dignity intact. Let them whisper, let them wonder, because for once, they were finally seeing me. 10 minutes after the mic drop, I was locked in a bathroom, staring at the woman my daughter no longer recognized. I sat on the closed toilet lid of the bridal suite bathroom, my hands still trembling. The soft hum of music from the ballroom barely made it through the thick door. It felt a world away. My face in the mirror looked familiar and foreign. Same tired eyes, same lines around my mouth, but something had changed. I had changed. I'd just told a room full of strangers, my daughter's new family, the truth. That Melissa had buried me under years of shame, rewritten our past to fit the polished image she now needed. And I finally chose myself over her comfort. Why did it take so long? Maybe because I spent decades biting my tongue, always choosing peace over pride. Melissa was my only child. I raised her alone after her father walked out when she was 6. There were days I worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. I used to come home, bone-tired, and she'd be waiting with a drawing or a story or a question that couldn't wait until morning. And I'd always listen. So how did we get here? I thought back to the last few years, the quiet distancing, the way she'd stopped introducing me to her friends. The sudden shift in how she spoke about her childhood, glossing over anything that didn't sound like a magazine spread. The first time I heard her say, "I built everything on my own," like my sacrifices were footnotes she didn't need anymore. I remember thinking, maybe she's just trying to fit in. Maybe the pressure of marrying into Brandon's wealthy family was making her nervous. Maybe. But standing in that bathroom now, there were no more maybes. Just cold, clear truth. Melissa was ashamed of me. I looked down at the phone in my lap. Missed calls, messages, from people at the wedding. From people who had no idea who I really was, until tonight. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I opened the photo I'd taken earlier that morning. Me, holding the lace handkerchief my mother left me. The one I was going to carry during the ceremony. A piece of history, of women who came before me, women who survived and didn't let the world tell them who they were. I thought I'd be crying by now. But no, I was calm, steady, because what I said out there, that wasn't revenge, it was relief. For years, I kept quiet, thinking silence was strength. But silence had turned into erasure. And the moment Melissa introduced me as the help, I knew, if I didn't speak now, I'd never get another chance. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Mrs. Loretta? It was a young woman's voice, one of the catering staff, I think. There's someone looking for you. The groom's father. He said he'd like to apologize. I stood up, smoothed my dress, checked my lipstick. Let them come, one by one. Let them reckon with the truth they clapped for, without knowing it was wrapped in decades of quiet pain. Tonight, I chose me. And I wasn't done yet. 15 years ago, I sold my mother's wedding ring so Melissa could start college. She never knew. Maybe she never cared. We were sitting at our little kitchen table, the one with a chipped corner and a coffee stain shaped like a heart. I'd just finished writing the last check for Melissa's college deposit. I remember the sound it made when I tore it from the book, final, like the closing of a door. We celebrated that night with cereal. Not because it was tradition. Because that's all we had left in the pantry. But Melissa was glowing, holding her acceptance letter like it was a golden ticket. I'm gonna make you proud, Mama, she said. You already have, I wanted to say. But I just smiled, swallowed the lump in my throat, and pretended I didn't see the stack of overdue bills behind her. That was the year I sold my mama's ring. A modest piece, silver, a tiny opal in the middle. She wore it every Sunday to church. It wasn't worth much, but the pawnshop gave me just enough to cover what our savings couldn't. I never told Melissa. I didn't want her to feel guilty. Now, looking back, maybe I should have let her know what it cost to build the pedestal she stands on. Because somewhere along the way, the story changed. Melissa started leaving things out when she talked about our life. Her single mom who worked hard turned into vague comments about coming from humble beginnings, as if those beginnings were a shame to be survived, not honored. I remember the first time she brought Brandon over. He was polite, but I could see the look in his eye. The way he scanned our living room like it was a set from some poverty documentary. Melissa laughed too loudly that night. Called our home cute, in a way that stung. A few months later, she stopped inviting me to meet his family. They're just a little old-fashioned, she'd say, avoiding my eyes. It's better to take things slow. But then she started spending weekends at their lake house. Attending parties I only saw glimpses of on social media. Always dressed in pastels. Always smiling in group photos where I was never included. At first, I told myself it was just growing pains. That every daughter pulls away a little when building her own life. But then came the wedding planning, and I noticed how little I was asked, how often I was updated instead of consulted. She never asked me to help pay for the wedding. Because she didn't want help. She wanted distance. I once heard her say to a friend, Brandon and I are starting fresh, no baggage. No baggage. That's what I was now. A burden she carried in silence, if at all. It broke me in ways I didn't understand at the time. And still, I showed up. I folded napkins. I wore the blue lace dress. I brought the heirloom handkerchief, thinking maybe, just maybe, she'd ask me to pin it to her bouquet. She didn't. I wasn't her mother anymore. I was an accessory to her image. A background extra with a history too heavy to fit in the perfect story she wanted to tell. But stories have a way of unfolding, whether we like it or not. In mine, it wasn't over. At the rehearsal dinner, she seated me with the photographers. That's when I knew, she wasn't just embarrassed by me, she wanted me invisible. The night before the wedding, I wore a soft lilac dress. Modest, elegant. I'd curled my hair, added a little shimmer to my cheeks. I told myself, tonight, she'll see me. Tonight, she'll remember. The venue was gorgeous, candlelight, classical music, linen napkins folded into swans. I spotted the groom's parents seated front and center, sipping wine like royalty. When the planner approached me with a forced smile and gestured toward a back corner, I already knew. Table 9, next to the equipment cases and camera crew. There were wires taped to the floor. A light stand blocked part of my view of the head table. My place card was misspelled, Loretta. I stared at it for a long second. Melissa didn't make a mistake. She made a message. Later, when she passed my table laughing with her future mother-in-law, I gently touched her arm. "Sweetheart, I thought maybe I'd be sitting a little closer?" Her smile vanished for a flash, just a flicker, before she composed herself. "Mom, don't make this about you," she whispered through her teeth. "I had to make choices. Please don't be difficult tonight." Difficult. I almost laughed. If she knew what difficult looked like, raising a child on food stamps, staying up all night grading papers just to afford one more lesson, walking to work in the snow because the car broke down again, she wouldn't dare use that word on me. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded, quiet, composed. Then I reached for my phone and sent a message I never thought I'd send. "Daniel, remember the envelope I gave you last year? Hold on to it. I may need it soon." Daniel was an old friend. A lawyer I'd trusted for years. Months ago, on a hunch, maybe just mother's instinct, I'd compiled every financial record tied to Melissa's adult life. Her tuition payments, the loan I co-signed for her first car, the deed to the house she and Brandon now lived in, under my name. All of it, tucked away in an envelope labeled for when enough is enough. I never expected to use it. But sitting at table 9, I realized. I already had. After dinner, as people mingled and posed for photos, Brandon's aunt leaned over and asked if I worked with the caterers. I gave her a soft smile and said, "No, just family." She blinked, confused. "Oh, Melissa didn't say?" I know she didn't. I excused myself, walked outside into the night air, and stood beneath a willow tree. I looked up at the stars and thought of my mother. Of the generations of women who came before me, strong, patient, silenced. And I promised them, this ends with me. A week before the wedding, I overheard her lying about me, and something inside me cracked for good. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my apartment, watering the spider plant Melissa gave me for Mother's Day 2 years ago, the last time she really tried. I was about to turn on the kettle when I heard her voice through the phone speaker. She was in the kitchen, not knowing I was in the hallway, just around the corner. "I mean, of course she refused to help pay for the wedding," she said, laughing. "She always acts like she's struggling. But that's just her way." I froze. Her future mother-in-law responded with a light scoff. "Well, I suppose that's what happens when you come from a different class." Melissa lowered her voice, but I still caught it. "She's just never really understood how things are done at this level." I stood there, heart thudding in my ears, a little splash of water dripping from the watering can onto the tile. She lied. She never asked me to help pay for the wedding. Never once. I would have said yes. Of course I would have. I would have offered more than she needed, just to feel included. But she didn't want my help. She wanted an excuse. A story that made her look like she'd risen from ashes all on her own. She didn't want to share the stage. Not even with the woman who built it. I backed away quietly, into the bathroom, shut the door, and sat on the closed lid of the toilet, just breathing. Was this who she really was? Or was this who she became trying to fit into a world that demanded polished stories and spotless pasts? I thought about every time she said, "Don't worry, Mom. You've done enough." It used to sound like love. Now it sounded like dismissal. I went to the drawer in my desk and pulled out the folder Daniel had helped me prepare months ago. Not because I planned to use it, but because I needed to remember, really remember, everything I'd done. Receipts, checks, transfers, notes from teachers, college admission letters, pictures of Melissa in a thrift store prom dress we altered together to look like a designer piece. Page after page of proof. Not of money, of devotion. That night, I didn't sleep much. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning in slow circles and wondered, when did love become something I had to prove? When did Melissa start seeing me as an obstacle, not a foundation? And more than that, why had I let her? I made a cup of tea at 3 a.m., sat by the window, and held the lace handkerchief my mother left me, the one I planned to tuck into my dress at the wedding. It used to symbolize tradition, strength, family. Now, it reminded me of everything I was expected to give without ever being asked what I needed. Melissa thought I wouldn't say anything. She thought I'd keep swallowing my pride just to stay close. But she was wrong. The wedding wasn't just going to be her fresh start. It was going to be mine too. I went to church for comfort. What I found was a stranger's truth that cut deeper than any sermon. The Sunday before the wedding, I woke up before dawn. I couldn't sleep. My mind was heavy, swirling with memories and quiet betrayals. I didn't want coffee. I didn't want breakfast. I wanted silence, something steady to hold on to. So I walked 3 blocks to St. Augustine's. The church was nearly empty when I slipped into the back pew. Candles flickered. The organist played something soft, almost like a lullaby. For a while, I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, staring at the altar. I wasn't praying. Not really. I just wanted to feel something holy again. Something untouched by lies or shame or appearances. A few minutes later, a woman slid into the pew beside me. Late 70s, maybe early 80s. Gray hair pulled into a bun. She had a face like mine, lived in, lined with decades. She didn't say anything at first. Just nodded, folded her hands, and sat quietly next to me like we'd done this 1,000 times. Then, out of nowhere, she leaned over and whispered, "You don't have to prove your worth to anyone who's forgotten who raised them." I turned to her slowly. "What did you say?" She smiled gently, as if she hadn't just looked straight into the center of my soul. "I've got 3 children," she said, eyes forward. 2 of them haven't called in over a year. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I remind them of where they came from. Her words hit me like a bell toll. Not loud, just deep. Resounding. She patted my hand. "Let them chase their shiny things. We know what lasts." And just like that, she stood up, walked toward the front, and lit a candle. I never even got her name. But I sat there for another 20 minutes, her words ringing louder than the priest's entire homily. I thought about how hard I'd tried to make Melissa feel proud of her roots. How I'd always downplayed our struggles, polished our story, tried to keep up appearances. I thought if I just stayed supportive, if I just stayed quiet, she'd love me enough to bring me along. But silence hadn't earned me a seat at her table. It had earned me a folding chair by the door. And now I was done folding myself smaller. When I left the church, the morning sun was already high. Warm. Blinding. I stood on the front steps for a long time, feeling the light on my face. My phone buzzed in my purse, a text from Melissa, reminding me to be helpful and low-key on the wedding day. Helpful and low-key. Like a maid. Like a shadow. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the cafe down the street and ordered myself a full breakfast. Eggs, pancakes, fresh orange juice. I sat by the window, watching the world move. For once, I didn't wonder what Melissa would think. That woman in the church, she gave me something Melissa hadn't in years. Permission to value myself. And I wasn't letting that go. I opened the lockbox and gathered everything, not out of spite, but because I knew what was coming. That Sunday evening, after the church and after the cafe, I went home and pulled the old lockbox from the top shelf of my closet. It was heavy, not just with papers, but with years. Inside were documents Melissa didn't know I still had. Every tuition payment, every loan record, every receipt I'd saved without knowing why. Maybe a part of me always knew I'd need them. One by one, I laid them out on the table. The check I wrote to her college when she was short on housing funds. The email confirming the car loan I co-signed, and later paid off. The bank statements showing monthly transfers to help with rent. The Venmo screenshots from late-night emergencies. Even the invoice for the down payment on the house Melissa and Brandon now claimed as their home. That house, it was still under my name. They'd never bothered to check. Or maybe they had, and assumed I wouldn't remember. Wouldn't dare say anything. But I remembered everything. I put the documents in a red folder and labeled it with one word, later. And then I added something else, something I'd never meant to use. The formal deed transfer, unsigned. It had been sitting with my lawyer for over a year. A gift I was planning to give them after the wedding, once I felt secure that I'd still have a place in their new life. A way to say, here. Start your life. I trust you. But now? Now it stayed in the lockbox. Melissa had made it clear, there was no room for me in her carefully curated world. I wasn't family. I was a favor. A liability. So I was done giving gifts to people who'd already packed up my place in their life. That night, I sat on the couch in my living room, the one she helped pick out years ago, and watched the red folder resting on my coffee table like a loaded weapon. Not for revenge, for protection, because Melissa had rewritten the story. And I was finally picking up the pen. I thought about calling her. About asking, one last time, why? But then I imagined her brushing me off again, making excuses, twisting it into something about me being too emotional. Instead, I made another call. Daniel, I might need you on standby this week, I told him. My voice didn't shake. He was quiet for a moment. Then, is this about the house? It's about all of it. He sighed. You're ready to use the envelope? I'm ready, I said. If she wants a new life so badly, she can have it. But not on my back anymore. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine. Not out of sadness, out of certainty. Melissa had made her choices. Now I would make mine. And when the moment came, I'd be ready. The makeup artist looked at me and asked if I was the housekeeper. That's when I knew, Melissa hadn't just erased me, she'd replaced me. It was the morning of the wedding. I arrived early, as Melissa had asked. Not to help, necessarily, she hadn't said that out loud, but to be available, whatever that meant. The venue dressing room was bustling with stylists, curling irons, dresses hanging like ghosts. Laughter, champagne flutes clinking, girls adjusting each other's earrings. I stood by the mirror, holding a small garment bag with a hand-sewn wrap I'd made for Melissa, ivory lace, stitched with quiet care. She never even looked at it. One of the makeup artists glanced at me as I reached for a tissue. "Oh, are you the housekeeper?" she asked casually, like she was making conversation. I stared at her. My hands froze mid-motion. "I'm the mother of the bride," I said slowly, every word tasting like metal. She blinked. Her face flushed. "Oh, I'm so sorry, she didn't mention." No, she didn't. Melissa hadn't told them who I was. In a room full of strangers painting her into a picture-perfect bride, she'd let me blend into the wallpaper, an extra with no lines, no name, no story. I stepped outside into the hallway, breathing in short, sharp pulls. I found her alone near the coffee bar, adjusting her veil. I kept my voice even. "Why didn't you tell them who I am?" She didn't flinch, didn't even meet my eyes. "Because," she said, "I need them to respect me. Not pity me." I blinked. "Pity? You think they'd pity you for having me as a mother?" She finally looked at me. Her face was unreadable. I've worked hard to build something new. You wouldn't understand." No, she was right. I didn't understand. I didn't understand how the same girl who clung to me during thunderstorms could turn around and make me disappear. I didn't understand how I became a threat just for existing. But I didn't say any of that. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just nodded. Because I'd already heard enough. I took the wrap I made and folded it neatly back into its bag. Walked past the dressing room full of women who thought I was the help. Past the vendors, the florists, the guests arriving in clusters. And I stepped outside into the side garden, where it was quiet. Where it was real. I pulled out my phone and dialed. "Daniel?" I said. "I need you on standby tonight." He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. I looked up at the venue, white flowers, gold trim, the illusion of perfection. If Melissa wanted to erase me, I'd let her. But I'd also erase her favorite illusion, the foundation of her new life. Because the house she slept in? Still mine. The loans she bragged about paying off? Still my name on the dotted line. The woman she tried to hide? Still here. And now? Done hiding. While they toasted champagne, I stood in the garden and made the call that would change everything. The side garden behind the venue was quiet, shaded by tall hedges and lined with fairy lights. I stood beneath an old oak tree, the distant sound of string music floating from the reception hall. In my hand, the phone still buzzed with notifications. Messages from cousins asking where I was seated, a bridesmaid selfie I was tagged in, and nothing from Melissa. Not even a thank you. Not even a check-in. But I wasn't surprised. I took one long breath and hit call. Daniel answered on the second ring. "Is this the moment?" "Yes," I said, calm, final. "I'm ready to use the envelope." There was a pause. Then, "All right. I'll send the letter tonight. Certified mail with a digital copy for you." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. It was done. That letter, sitting sealed in his drawer for months, was a formal notice. Melissa and Brandon had 30 days to vacate the home or begin paying market rent. No more generosity. No more blurred lines. Just a contract. Like any other tenant, I didn't do it out of vengeance. I did it because I was finally, painfully clear, if I kept giving her everything, I'd have nothing left for myself. The garden breeze picked up. A soft swirl of petals blew across the stone path. I closed my eyes for a moment and let it wash over me. And then I smiled, not a vengeful smile, not smug. Just peaceful. Because I knew something she didn't. She thought she was in control. That she'd managed the story, curated the image, positioned me just far enough from the frame. But I still held the frame. And now, I was done holding it up for her. I walked slowly back toward the building. From a distance, I could see Melissa twirling on the dance floor, her train catching the light. Brandon laughed beside her, champagne in hand. The DJ was announcing cake soon. And me? I slipped in through the back hallway, avoided the crowd, and took one final look at the room where my name had never been spoken. Let them keep their curated smiles. Let them toast a future built on lies. I wouldn't be there when it collapsed. Because I had finally stepped out of the shadows Melissa put me in, and into the quiet light of my own truth. I didn't owe her my silence. Not anymore. She dared me to stay quiet. Instead, I stood up, walked to the microphone, and made the room go silent. The reception was in full swing. Champagne was flowing. Laughter bounced off the crystal chandeliers. Guests clinked glasses, posing for photos with the newlyweds like it was a magazine shoot. And me? I sat at the edge of the room, invisible again. From my corner, I watched Melissa, my daughter, working the room like a polished debutante. Laughing with Brandon's aunts. Winking at the photographer. Throwing her head back like life had never once tasted like ramen noodles or eviction notices. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was still. And in that stillness, I saw her glance at me. Just for a second. A flicker. It wasn't a warm look. It wasn't regret. It was a dare. She was waiting to see what I'd do. Whether I'd stay quiet, like always. Whether I'd take the scraps she offered and call it love. One of Brandon's cousins leaned toward their table and said something that made everyone laugh. I couldn't hear it, but I saw Melissa smirk and look at me again. That was her final push. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked, calmly, toward the microphone. The DJ blinked at me. "Ma'am? I just want to say a few words," I said, gently. No fuss, no fire, just finality. He hesitated, glanced at Melissa, but I was already stepping up. The mic was warm in my hand. The chatter began to fade. Forks stilled. Glasses hovered mid-air. I looked around the room, chandeliers twinkling above, white roses on every table, sequined dresses, tailored suits. And then I began. Melissa didn't invite me here as her mother. The words dropped like a stone in still water. She introduced me as someone who helps with the little things. Not family, not mom, just someone, in the background. A hush swept over the room. I let it settle. But what none of you know, I continued, is that I helped Melissa pay for college. I co-signed her first loan. I covered rent when they were jobless. I even paid the down payment on the home she and Brandon now live in. Gasps. A soft clink as someone set down their glass too hard. I did it all willingly. Quietly. Because I believed in her. I looked toward Melissa then, not with anger. With mourning. But it seems that somewhere along the way, I became an inconvenience to her story. Something she needed to edit out. I took one breath, then delivered the line I knew would change everything. So if I'm no longer part of her life, that's fine. But the house? The one they claim is theirs? It's still in my name. And as of tonight, they have 30 days to leave, or pay. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, dense. Melissa's face was pale. Brandon looked like he'd just been slapped. I gently set the mic down on the table. And then I walked away. Because I hadn't raised a perfect daughter. But I had finally raised my voice. I didn't speak to shame her. I spoke because I needed to remember I still had a voice, and it mattered. The ballroom was frozen. You could have heard a pin drop between the clink of someone's fork falling to their plate and the awkward shuffle of a bridesmaid pretending to check her phone. I didn't look back. I walked calmly through the sea of stunned faces. Past Brandon's father, who suddenly looked very sober. Past the floral arch Melissa once dreamed of. Past the carefully staged perfection she'd spent months crafting. I wasn't shaking. Not anymore. Outside the doors, the music tried to pick up again, the DJ fumbling with the playlist, desperate to patch over what couldn't be undone. But some things don't go back in the box. Not after the truth gets air. I stood in the hallway near the coat check, alone, breathing in the scent of eucalyptus and gardenias. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I smiled. Because I'd been holding that speech, or something like it, for years. Every time Melissa dismissed my stories. Every time she rolled her eyes at my thrift store dress. Every time she said, "Don't be dramatic, Mom," when I told her I missed the little girl who used to beg to sleep in my bed after a bad dream. That girl, she was gone. But I was still here. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. Opened the message thread with Daniel. Send the letter. My finger hovered for a moment. Then, tap. Done. No fire. No fury. Just a clean, quiet line drawn where a boundary should have been years ago. 30 days. They could leave, or they could pay. But they could no longer pretend I didn't exist while living on the foundation I built. I didn't want to do it. But I couldn't unsee what she'd become. And what I'd allowed. A mother who gave and gave, until she disappeared. No more. The doors behind me opened and footsteps echoed. I turned, expecting a staff member or maybe Brandon. But it was no one I recognized, just a guest brushing past, giving me a wide berth like I was made of dynamite. Let them be uncomfortable. I'd been uncomfortable for decades. Now it was someone else's turn. A staff member approached, trying not to meet my eyes. "Would you like your coat, ma'am?" I nodded. She handed it to me with care, eyes filled with a new kind of recognition, not pity. "Respect. I hope you have a peaceful night," she said softly. I looked at her, maybe 23, a college student or someone working her way through life, and saw what Melissa used to be. Grateful, hopeful, kind. "I think I finally will," I said. Then I stepped outside, into the cool night air, and wrapped the coat around my shoulders. For the first time in years, the weight of silence was gone. And in its place, something that felt a lot like freedom. I didn't raise my voice. I just sent the letter. And that's when everything started to shift. The night air was sharp, but clean. I stood by the curb while the valet fetched someone else's car, my coat wrapped tight around me. I wasn't leaving in a whirlwind or a tantrum. Just leaving. I checked my phone. Daniel had already replied. "Letter sent. Certified. She'll receive it Monday. You'll have your copy first thing." That was it. The move was made. I'd never evicted anyone in my life. Never even imagined doing so to my own daughter. But Melissa had made it very clear, she no longer saw me as her mother, not in any way that mattered. She didn't want a mother. She wanted a sponsor. And I was done being a silent sponsor to someone ashamed of my name. I opened the rideshare app on my phone and waited. I didn't want to go back into the ballroom, and I didn't need to say goodbye to people who hadn't cared I was missing from the head table. As I waited, I glanced at the venue windows, lights glowing, silhouettes dancing. Somewhere in there, cake was being cut. Toasts were being forced. The cracks in the glass had begun to show. And I didn't feel 1 ounce of guilt. Not because I wanted to hurt her. But because for once, I had protected myself. I slid into the backseat of the car that pulled up, a kind-eyed driver who asked if I'd had a nice evening. I gave him the gentlest smile. Better than most. We rode in silence. When I got home, I placed my shoes neatly by the door. Took off the earrings Melissa had insisted I wear, small pearls, tasteful enough not to embarrass anyone. I set them on the counter and made a cup of tea. Then I opened the copy of the eviction notice Daniel had already emailed me. 30 days. Pay market rent or vacate. Signed and dated. Legal. Binding. I read every line like I was reading my own diary. This wasn't revenge. This was me taking back what had always been mine, not just the house, but the dignity I'd slowly traded away to keep the peace. They could rage. They could cry. They could spin stories. But this time, the truth was on paper. It wouldn't matter how she painted me. Because now, I had receipts. Literally. I sipped my tea and looked around my quiet apartment. No guests, no music, no chaos. Just silence. But it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. And somewhere, I hoped Melissa felt it too, not just the shock, but the weight of a door slowly closing. Because once a mother stops trying to be chosen, everything changes. 2 days after the wedding, Brandon showed up at my door. Alone. And what he said broke something open. It was Tuesday afternoon. I was folding laundry and listening to an old jazz record when the knock came. 3 short raps. Hesitant. I peeked through the peephole. Brandon. No Melissa. No suit. Just him, in jeans and a sweatshirt, standing there like a kid who'd been sent to the principal's office. I opened the door slowly. Brandon? He looked up. His eyes were tired. "Hi, Mrs. Loretta. Do you have a minute?" I stepped aside. He walked in with the kind of careful energy you use when you don't know if you're welcome. I offered him tea. He declined. I won't take much of your time, he said, sitting on the edge of the couch. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I didn't know, he added quickly. I didn't know what Melissa had told people. About you. About the house. About any of it. He looked down at his hands. She told us you were distant. That you were bitter. Controlling. That you didn't support the wedding because you were jealous. I nearly laughed. Jealous? But I let him speak. She said you tried to make everything about yourself. That you hadn't contributed anything since she left for college. He looked up again. I believed her. There it was. Honest. Ugly. True. I'm not proud of that, he continued. But I wanted to believe it. Because it made things easier. For her. For us. I nodded slowly. And now? He sighed. Now I'm embarrassed. And angry. And confused. I sat down across from him. Not cold. Not forgiving. Just real. Do you love her? I asked. He blinked. Of course I do. Then I hope you'll help her grow. He looked at me like he wanted to say something else, maybe to ask forgiveness, maybe to explain more. But what he said next stopped me in my tracks. If you'd still like to see your grandson, I'd like to bring him by. You shouldn't lose him over this. My throat tightened. That little boy, 4 years old, with Melissa's eyes and my smile, had no idea what had happened. He just knew I kept graham crackers in my purse and let him color on my receipts. I nodded. I'd like that. Brandon stood. I'll text you. I don't know where things are going with Melissa right now. But I needed to say thank you. For everything. Even the stuff I didn't know about. He turned to leave, then paused. She doesn't hate you, he said quietly. She just hates what you remind her of. He walked out before I could respond. I stood there, hands clasped, heart heavy, not with sadness. But with something new. Hope? Maybe. Clarity? Definitely. Because now, someone else knew the truth. And once the truth enters a room, it never leaves quietly. She barged in screaming. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. It was a week after the wedding. The eviction notice had landed. Word had spread, not from me, but from whoever Melissa vented to first. I hadn't heard a thing. Not a text. Not an apology. Just silence. Until she slammed open my front door like a hurricane in heels. You're unbelievable, she shouted. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Brandon's family won't even look me in the eye. Do you have any idea what you've done? She was red in the face. Hair still perfect. Nails still manicured. But her voice cracked in the middle, and that told me more than her rage ever could. I stayed seated on the couch. Calm. Unmoving. Melissa, I said, close the door. You weren't raised in a barn. That only made her angrier. Don't you dare lecture me right now. You humiliated me. No, I said. You humiliated me. For years. That night? I just stopped covering for you. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Because for the first time in her life, I wasn't trying to fix it. I wasn't softening my tone. I wasn't chasing her approval like a dog begging for scraps. I gave you everything I had, I continued. And when you got where you wanted to go, you tried to rewrite the story without me in it. She crossed her arms. You're ruining my life. I nodded slowly. No, I'm finally stopping you from ruining mine. Her mouth opened, then closed. Like she wasn't used to hearing me say words with sharp edges. You want to act like I never existed? I said. Fine. But don't sleep in the house I paid for. Don't build your new life on my sacrifices and then pretend I'm just some old woman with coupons and a cat. She blinked. That's not fair. No, I said. It's true. We stood in silence for a beat. The ticking clock in my kitchen was suddenly very loud. Then her shoulders dropped. Just a little. I don't know why I did it, she said softly. I guess. I didn't want them to see where I came from. I nodded. You didn't want them to see me. She looked at the floor. I don't know how to fix this. I don't either, I said. But you can start by leaving my house. Or paying for it, like any adult would. She flinched, but said nothing. I stood and walked to the door. Held it open, not cruelly, just clearly. She hesitated, then stepped through. For once, she didn't slam it behind her. I watched her walk down the steps in silence. She wasn't ready to change. But I was done waiting. She thought the court would save her. She forgot, I kept everything. The mediation room was colder than I expected. Neutral colors, bland art, a clock ticking a little too loud. Melissa sat across from me in a navy blazer she probably bought just for this, polished, expensive, hollow. Her lawyer shuffled papers beside her. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Daniel sat next to me, calm as ever. He slid the red folder across the table like a quiet declaration of war. Melissa had contested the eviction. Claimed it was retaliation. Said I was unstable and had threatened her in public. The judge, a woman in her 60s with no patience for theatrics, looked up from the documents and asked, "Was there any written rental agreement?" Melissa shifted. "No, she's my mother." The judge nodded. "And is she the legal owner of the property in question?" "Yes," Melissa said, barely above a whisper. "Then she is within her rights to request rent or lawful removal." Just like that. Clean. Clinical. Final. Melissa turned to her lawyer, stunned. She wasn't used to systems that didn't bend for charm or tears. In me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. For the first time in years, I was no longer drowning in guilt or second-guessing myself. I'd kept everything. Every payment. Every transfer. Every late-night money send. Every tax bill I paid on a house she claimed as her prize. I had facts. She had ego. And in court, facts win. When the session ended, Melissa stood up fast, knocking her chair slightly. She walked to the door, paused, and looked at me. But not like a daughter. Like a stranger trying to decide if they should apologize or spit. I looked back at her. Not with rage, with grief. Because I realized, right then, the woman I raised was gone. Or maybe she was never there the way I imagined. Maybe she was just passing through me, on her way to someone she thought was better. She didn't say a word as she left. Didn't even take the papers. I gathered my things. Daniel patted my hand. "You handled that beautifully," he said. I nodded. I handled it like a mother who's finally done playing martyr. Outside, the autumn air was crisp. I pulled my coat tighter and walked slowly to the car. I didn't cry. Not then. Because what was there left to mourn? The illusion? The fantasy? No, those were already buried. All that remained was the truth. And the truth had finally been spoken, out loud, on record, undeniable. She moved out in silence. But in that silence, something unexpected bloomed. It took 2 weeks for them to pack. I didn't go near the house. I didn't drive by. I didn't text to ask how it was going. Melissa never called, and I didn't expect her to. She left behind a few things. A cracked vase I gave her years ago, an old photo of us at her high school graduation. I found it in the mailbox. No note, just the photo, slightly bent, like a memory she couldn't throw away but didn't want to keep. Fine. She moved into a rental in a smaller neighborhood across town. Not bad, just quieter. Less curated. I heard from Brandon, not her. His message came in the form of a thank you card, handwritten, no flourish. Just a plain white envelope and words that mattered more than any speech she'd ever given. "Thank you for telling the truth." It cleared things I didn't know needed clearing. "We're both in therapy now. I don't know what comes next. But I'm trying." I read it twice. Then I tucked it into the red folder, along with the eviction paperwork. Not out of spite. Out of peace. I hadn't won anything. This wasn't a victory lap. But I had reclaimed something, a quiet, unshakable dignity that comes from finally choosing yourself over a version of love that demands your silence. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find my grandson, wide-eyed, holding a toy dinosaur, and Brandon behind him. "Hi, Grandma Loretta," the boy said, smiling like the world hadn't shifted. My heart cracked open. He ran into my arms like nothing had changed. Because to him, nothing had. I was still the woman who saved juice boxes in the fridge just for him. Still the lap he curled up on when his cartoons got too loud. Still the one who said, yes, to one more story, even when it was late. Brandon stayed for coffee. We didn't talk about Melissa. Not really. But he said, softly, he misses you. I didn't think it was right to take that away from him. Or from you. I nodded. You're doing the right thing. When they left, I stood on the porch with my tea and listened to the sound of their car rolling down the street. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt light. Not because I got justice. But because I got clarity. Maybe Melissa would grow. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe therapy would unearth the reasons she buried me in shame and polish. But that was her journey now. Mine was different. Mine was finally unfolding in silence, in peace, in the soft joy of knowing I didn't have to carry someone else's shame to feel worthy of love. I lost a daughter that day. Or maybe I just lost the illusion of one. But what I gained, that I'll never give away again. It's been 6 weeks. The air smells like honey and dry leaves. Autumn's leaning into winter, and I sit on my front porch with a blanket around my legs and a glass of sweet tea sweating beside me. My grandson's inside, playing with a box of old crayons and a cereal box I saved for crafts. He calls me Grandma Loretta, now, full of pride, no shame, no edits. And I let him, because no matter what came between me and Melissa, he's still mine. A living piece of the story I never have to apologize for. Sometimes the silence creeps in, the silence where Melissa's voice used to live. And I'd be lying if I said it doesn't sting. I still love her. I probably always will. But love is not the same as permission. Not anymore. She made her choices, chose distance over truth, appearance over relationship. And when I finally stopped offering myself on the altar of her convenience, she simply walked away. So be it. Because for the first time in decades, I'm not bracing myself for her disapproval. I'm not performing motherly perfection in exchange for slivers of affection. I'm just me, Loretta, a woman who gave everything and finally learned to keep something for herself. Sometimes the neighbor waves from across the yard and asks how the wedding went. I just smile and say, unforgettable. Let them think what they want. The people who matter know the truth. Brandon brings my grandson over every other weekend now. He never stays long, just enough time for the boy to run wild, eat too many cookies, and leave behind a new drawing for my fridge. Last time, it was a picture of 3 stick figures. One tall, one small, one in between. He pointed and said, "That's me. That's Daddy. And that's you. You're the one with the smile." I hung it up right under the magnet that says, "Home is where you're allowed to be tired." He doesn't know what I lost. He only knows what I still have. And so do I sip my tea. Watch the wind push the leaves around like old secrets finally letting go. Melissa may never call again. She may never explain, or apologize, or understand what she did. But I'm done waiting for her to become someone I can love without breaking myself. Because here, on this porch, in this life I've rebuilt, I am whole. And that's something no one, not even my own child, can take away.